Boise, Idaho. So Boise is located in southeastern Idaho in the foothills of the Boise National Forest, and we have over 190 miles of wilderness trails, including 27 miles of greenbelt that go right along our Boise River. So it's a really great, vibrant outdoor culture. Our downtown is growing and bustling and was recently rated in the top 8 in the country. We're also home to lots of different companies. So we have Micron Technologies here in the Valley, as well as HP, Albertsons, and Simplot Potatoes. Yes, we do supply McDonald's with their potatoes to make their French fries. Woot, woot. Boise State is a growing university. So since we won our first of 3 Fiesta Bowls 10 years ago, we've seen an increase in our traditional age student as well as our out-of-state college students. And as such, we've kind of transformed in the past 10 years from a commuter campus, which really served our local Treasure Valley non-traditional age students and all students locally, to now being really a regional residential campus. And we now house about 3,500 students on campus. So our housing department is made up of a few traditional style residence hall offerings, but we also have a lot of suite style townhomes and 4 different apartment complexes that we utilize to house our students on campus. We employ about 48 full-time employees within our department, from custodial, admin, to res life staff, and we employ about 150 student staff throughout the year. So our RAs, our desk assistants, we also have a really vibrant custodial student crew that works for us, as well as students who support our summer conference staff for us. And as we all know, summer is still busy for us, and I just wanted to let you know what we're doing here at Boise State currently. So we're getting ready to onboard our new professional staff next week, and we're continuing to recruit, which I'm sure many of you know seems to never be ending in our work. We have an expected 110% occupancy this fall, and that's including bringing on a new P3 this fall in a partnership with EDR. So there is a lot of growth happening and a lot of change happening, and with that, in the past few years has come a lot of new staff and a loss of traditions and protocols and the way things used to be done, and a lot more of us trying to build the plane as we fly it sometimes. So as we're kind of wrapping up our summer and headed into training, we're supporting our conference guests, reviewing our manuals, and just kind of finalizing those summer projects as we head into the school year and training season. So we're going to go ahead and get started into the main content of this presentation, which is about when it's the RA that is in trouble, and really how do we create a student staff conduct protocol that really helps ensure that we don't end up, or our staff don't end up, or our department doesn't end up in a liable situation. And so here's kind of the outline of where we're going during this webinar. So we're going to start with a case study, and I'm going to ask that you all who are listening utilize that chat feature to help add to this conversation during that time. I'm going to share a little bit of a story with you and kind of my experience when I was about 8 months into my position. And then we're going to talk a little bit about why this is so important in the work that we do, and how suggestions and ways in which we went about creating our protocol, and then things that I would recommend for you to consider as you implement this protocol and what resources are available. So that is where we are headed, and we are going to get started with our case study. So you currently serve as an assistant director, or associate director, my bad, you've been promoted, associate director for residence life at a mid-sized regional public institution. Congratulations. So in November, you receive a phone call from one of your resident directors. They tell you that one of their student staff members has reported to them that an RA on their staff has created a horror movie for a class that highlights actual conduct concerns about one of the building residents. The character in the movie does not share the exact same name of the resident, but it is very similar, and all the other residents know who the movie is really about. Not only have they created this video, but they have had their residents act in the video, and they have had a community showing in which the faculty and residents was also present for the viewing. The staff member who has reported this incident lives in the same community as the RA who made the video, and the two staff members have a history of personal and work-related conflict. So with this information, if you can, in your chat boxes, what concerns or questions are immediately coming to your mind when you get this information from your staff? What are some thoughts? All right, I'm not sure if I can see those, Sarah.
You should be able to.
Okay, no responses yet. Okay. All right, well then I'll talk to you a little bit about maybe some of the questions or concerns that I have from this case study. So some of my concerns I think is about resident involvement. So in what way were residents involved with this? I have concerns about conduct information regarding a student being shared within a community. So confidential information being shared with other residents. I'm also concerned about a faculty member being perceived as having a role in this situation. And I'm also concerned about who the information is coming from and that past conflict and history that's there. And so there are questions that are being asked as this information might be coming in to me and I'm being informed of this. So if there are other concerns or thoughts, feel free to type those in. I'm curious though, like, and I know I'm asking a lot for participating, but like, what might be your first step that you might take in this situation if this was brought to you and you were in this role? So if you can use that chat feature and type in an idea of a first step. So we have one response, which is basically talk to faculty members about their level of involvement, gather some information. Absolutely. So I think in these situations, we want to just get as much information as we can about the situation. Have we seen the video? Is there a way we can get the video? You know, how many people have been impacted? What was the level of involvement with faculty? What was the level of involvement of residents? So just kind of gathering a little bit more information is absolutely maybe a great first step. I might also think about like, okay, so from an employment situation, is there any liability in continuing to keep the student in their role currently? So can I guarantee confidentiality and trust with this staff member? Can I guarantee good decision making with this staff member knowing this information may have occurred? And so that's something to think about too is, you know, do we need to do anything in the meantime while we're investigating or reviewing the situation? All right, so a little bit of a story time for all of you. Surprise, surprise, we had a very similar situation that happened at Boise State in the fall of 2015. And just to give you some context of what was kind of going on within our student staffing at that point, particularly our RA staff at that point, was that we had already removed about 7 student staff members from their roles that fall. And most are due to, like, alcohol and drug related incidents and the behaviors around that and the impact in residents. But this situation was outside the norm for us in terms of what we usually do. And so here are just some of the steps that we took as a staff member. So one of the things I talked about within that case study is there any concern in keeping that staff member in their current role? Can they continue to do their job effectively? What is the impact on the community, on the staff? Is there negative? And so typically in any of our situations where we think that there's impact on residents or on the community or on the staff, we ask that staff member to take a break until we can review the situation. And we try to say, we'll get back to you within 48 hours, but we just want you to take a break from your rounds, from working the desk, and whatnot. So we asked the staff member to take a break, to step back from the position while we reviewed this information. And we also asked the student to move from their community. We weren't, based on the information that we had gathered from the other staff member, we were able to get the actual video and see the video. And then based on our knowledge of the conduct situations with that resident, we had a lot of concern about that information have been shared out to inappropriate individuals. And so we asked that person to relocate while we were doing our review of the situation. So we also asked for documentation from the resident director who received the report, from the student staff member who came and reported it, from the faculty member who was aware that this had happened, so that we gathered, again, as much information from our staff as we could regarding this situation. We also started our conduct process. So with having had 7 student staff already removed that fall, we felt like we had a pretty good protocol in place in how we handled student staff conduct issues, and that was whether or not to suspend them from their positions, remove them from the community. And then we had a separate process for a student conduct situation. So is there a violation to our student conduct, code of conduct, and then also our HR process. And so we try to keep those processes separate and communicate that to our student staff to let them know. And so we started our conduct process, and we started that in-house with one of our assistant directors, overviewing that conduct process. And then the HR process stayed with the supervisor and with me, and we started that with in-house as well, which was gathering data, information, sitting with that student staff member, and having a conversation. So that's where it started. Those were the initial steps that we took in that process. So we made some mistakes along the way in terms of how we handled the situation. And I'm going to go over those a little bit. So the first one is just consistency. So it was later brought to our attention that we weren't being consistent with this staff member. We had removed a staff member from their position earlier in the year and had not relocated them immediately. And so the student staff member felt that we weren't being consistent in our process and asking them to be removed immediately from their community. And we had arguments for our rationale behind that, but really when you looked at it, it wasn't a consistent process. The next thing we did was we wanted to make it was that we just didn't have a written protocol anywhere. So we had a process in our minds and a protocol that we were following, but it wasn't written down anywhere. And so there was nothing to refer back to. There was nothing when the student or the parent was asking for, where is this written? We didn't have it. And so that provided challenges for us in giving rationale to our decisions. There was also a lot of political challenges with the student staff family members being involved. And so trying to negotiate that, we got a lot of hands in our cookie jar, and that led to like confusion around staffing responsibilities. So we now had an assistant director who was involved in the conduct process, and we had the resident director slash supervisor working directly with the student staff member, and we had and the residents involved. And then we had me, who was the ultimate like HR decision maker, and then we had our director who was getting complaints from the parent, who was going, to the president's office and the vice president's office out of concern for her student. And then they started weighing in, and HR starts weighing in. So lots of hands in the cookie jar, which just confused who was responsible for what. And then it also fell where all of this kind of process in early November, and with all these hands in the cookie jar, it started to impact our timeline, which pushed us into fall break. And so usually with a conduct process, we can stay within our timelines really, really adequately. With this falling into a break period and a staff member being out of the office, it changed our timeline and fell out of timeline for our conduct code. So there was also a lack of communication with our human resource office, with our general counsel office. And then the other thing that I think we weren't considering in a lot of ways was the impact on our residents in terms of during this entire time, our timeline kept getting stretched out, and so we didn't have a staffing coverage plan in place. And so this community was going without an RA while we had the staff member who was being basically put on suspension from their position. And so something that we thought was just going to be a week to process ended up taking over a month to process, and that community went without that leadership and that support and resource during that time. And so looking back on it, we needed to figure out a better staffing coverage plan to support the community and the residents. So lots of mistakes, lots of reflection on those. And really in the end, it became very obvious to me, to my professional staff, and also to several campus partners that we really needed a written protocol addressing when we had student staff conduct issues, because especially for situations such as this that aren't necessarily as black and white as did you drink or did you not drink and violate our policy, it was really challenging. And so from there, basically we talked about really why the protocol was so important. So lots of different reasons. So it's not just about having a protocol, but it's about having a written protocol. And there's several reasons why writing it down is so important. And some of those are simple as like it gives us instructions and steps that we need to take to ensure that we are addressing the incident or the situation or the scenario from 360 degrees rather than just looking at it from one vantage point. It also clarifies our staff's roles and responsibilities within this. And then it also adds some transparency for the student staff members who may be going through these protocols to their support systems who may be advocating for them. And then also, I think it just is helpful for students to know what to expect. This also just like having it written and having a protocol available leads really to consistent actions. And so that way when, empathy is my number 2 strengths finder. And so when I meet with students and I hear their stories and I want to make decisions that I think are best for them in the community, I also now have a protocol that I can follow that basically allows me an out when I'm hearing the sad story of how they regret it and whatnot, to be able to say to them, okay, I understand that, and here's the decisions that we have to do to move forward. Here's our process, which is comforting on some level as someone who's going through these processes, but it also leads back to that student understanding and knowing our process going forward as well. So it explains also our actions to those involved. And so I did a lot of, through this process and through this story and this situation, a lot of like having to justify the decisions that were made in the situation. So justifying, why we might have sent it to conduct, justifying why it took longer to meet with a student than we wanted it to, justifying having to talk with more than just our student staff members, but having to talk to our residents about the situation. And so being able to have a protocol that's outlined is something, again, that goes back to when people, whether it's, the support systems or those above you are asking, well, why did you choose to do it this way? Having a protocol to fall back on is something that is supportive for you as an HR professional. So additionally, it just is an opportunity to address outside factors and considerations. So, considering and break protocols. So, within our student code of conduct, a lot of time we talk about timelines, and there's always usually a caveat in there about break periods and what that means, or weekends or business days, or when the university is open. And so being able to address those within the protocol. And then additionally, it really helped us to set a timeline to say, okay, so when the incident's reported, here's what's going to happen, and here's when it's going to happen. And so that helped us stay a little bit on timeline as well. So talking about how to create a protocol. So we literally at this point had lost, if there was a protocol, it was lost. So it wasn't in any of our manuals in terms of a how-to or a structure guide. And so somehow along the way in our transitions of staffing, we lost that information. And so we basically had to start over from scratch in terms of creating what this protocol could look like. So basically we started with what we already knew and what we already had. So we did not have a protocol, but we were holding staff accountable in a way with some consistency in certain ways, and we were able to review kind of our practices and what we had been doing. What is your history? So, when I first got here, that first year I was here, we only lost students really due to grades, and we weren't losing students to behavioral issues. But that fall, when this incident occurred, we had lost lots of students to behavioral incidents. And what were they really about? And what processes did we use in those situations? And were there areas where we could have been more consistent, or having this protocol would have been great? And then what challenges or ideas do your current staff have? So I think really being able to go to the staff members that are overseeing these processes, but also the staff members who are impacted by these processes. So I wanted to hear from our student staff about what they had heard from their peers who had gone through these processes, and what their experiences had been and where the challenges were. I don't think ever through these processes we want to punish students. We want them to feel supported. We want to understand their decision making, and we want it to be a learning experience. But somehow along the way, it felt like we had lost some of that. And so some of the feedback we were gaining from our current staff was that the process was scary, it was intimidating, they didn't know what it was inconsistent. And so being able to take that feedback and that information to help direct us was really important. And then knowing what your peers do. So at Boise State, we're really good about talking with our partners within the Division of Student Affairs and asking them how they address situations, if they have protocols written down, talking institutionally to peers across the university, and then also checking in with our peers regionally. Do you have a process? Do you have a protocol? What does it look like? What are things that you consider in terms of your conduct processes with your student staff? And how do you make those decisions? So great places to start is just to gather a lot of that data and that information. The next step really that I would tell you in creating any protocol is really who are your partners and who are your resources. And so in this situation with our student staff conduct protocol, we really had to look at, it's not just about me as a department lead, but also looking at the people who supervise our student staff themselves, our Office of Student Conduct that oversees our student conduct process, human resources and their policies and guidelines and expectations, being able to advocate for employees at the university level, and then also our general counsel and being able to run things by them or hear their thoughts on our our processes was really helpful in determining, does this make sense? Does it seem fair? Does it seem to be in line with the way that other people at the institution are doing this? So I basically took the time and I met with each individual campus partner one-on-one. So student staff I got feedback from, our professional staff I got feedback from, and then I went and met with these campus partners and got feedback about, you know, when we think about this situation or other situations like this that we've had, what have been your experience with it? What have been your challenges? What would have made it easier on your end? Do you have advice? Are there requirements that we didn't consider? And so one of those things that played into a huge part of this situation is that Idaho is an at-will state, which basically means that our employees are hired at will, which means that at any point in time I can be removed from my position for any reason. So if I upset Dean Kennedy, who's our director, and maybe I bring him Pepsi rather than his Mountain Dew that he loves so well, he can decide, nope, Christina's gone, fired, and he can make that decision. And really within the state of Idaho, I don't have a lot of ground in which to stand on. The problem that we ran into is that we didn't notify our student staff in writing that they were at-will employees, and so that was something that we had to consider in our protocols and in our agreement, our job agreements and job contracts and job descriptions, was how do we present this information to them? How do we document it? How do we make it transparent to them? Additionally, there were conversations and questions about the student code of conduct process. And so in most of our student conduct processes that we had this year or that year, most of them involved violations of the student code of conduct, whether it was alcohol, drugs, harassment of some sort. And so I think as we navigated those processes, it got a little convoluted, and we were asking questions within the moment, not knowing how the student code of conduct process was influencing the HR process, or how the HR process could influence the student code of conduct. And so I think being able to sit down to bring folks together into one room and talk about, you know, if I'm told something by a student staff member when I meet with them about their job expectations from an HR standpoint, and they tell me information that I think is relevant to the student conduct process, can I share that information with the conduct officer? Or if the student goes through the conduct process, can that conduct officer share information with me as an employer? And I think being able to really clarify that within the protocol, again, an idea of transparency to our students, that this is separate, but that they can influence each other possibly, and in which ways can they influence them, is also helpful, not just for the student going through the process, but helpful for the staff members who are navigating it to say, oh, it's okay for me to share with the hearing officer that the student said that they wish they had not used like a similar name for the video, right? And can I share that information? So just being able to bring folks together into one space to talk through that. Additionally, during that time when we were able to pull together our campus resource partners and some of our staff into that same room, we were able to kind of start creating an outline of what this protocol could look like in a way that we were all kind of comfortable with. And it allowed us to ask questions or challenge people's ideas of that process. It did not mean that I walked out of that meeting with a final protocol in place by any means whatsoever, but it did mean that I had kind of an outline and a place to start in really trying to develop what specifically our protocol was around this. So then after I left that meeting, I really kind of took that outline and I added in the detail, right? So I went back and I talked about, like, does this align with our philosophy of our department? So does it line up with our mission, our vision, our values? Our department is becoming very relational focused, and so I wanted to know that this process and this protocol was reflective of the relationships that we were building with student staff and with our communities. I also was able to then go in and add these addressing expectations, talking about where it's outlined in job agreements, I was able to take into account those considerations of break times, of a situation in which I think sometimes we don't know if a student has violated a policy or not, but we get information and it needs to be looked at, and so sometimes we have to wait for the conduct process to occur before we get that. And so we were able to outline that information. We were able to talk about what are the best practices for this protocol and moving forward. So basically, I just took that outline and I really added in more detail into what it is that we needed to do, adding in those timelines, those considerations. So from that, I had a rough draft, and it is by no means done. So at that point in time with that rough draft, I sought out more feedback. So I put that rough draft before our student staff, some of our student staff, before our professional staff, before our campus partners, before our department leadership to say, hey, here is what Residence Life is looking at doing. Does this line up with what we've talked about? Does it match what your practices are as a supervisor in your area? Are there things I'm missing that are important or vital for us? And so that was really helpful to sit down with other people and gain perspectives before I said, oh, this is done. And so once I gathered more feedback, went back and took those pieces and were able to edit that back into that kind of final draft, it still wasn't done. And so at that point, I take all of our protocols, all of our processes, formal-wise, and I run those by our general counsel in our HR. And it's really important to me that we basically have those two individuals signing off, because if we end up in a legal situation where a student is saying that we did not follow our protocols or we did not follow our HR practices, we need to know that the folks in human resources, the folks in the general counsel's office will have our back and understand our protocols and the way we make decisions, and that they've signed off on it and agreed to it. So once we gather all that final feedback, it still gets another additional look through by those two offices and basically a stamp of approval that we can move forward in utilizing that protocol with our student staff. So those are kind of the steps we took basically in creating the protocol here at Boise State. So I have an outline of our protocol. So our protocol, actually being summer, is off at general counsel right now for final review. We review it annually, not just our student staff conduct protocol, but all of our protocols are off over at general counsel for review. And so if we make changes or edits, we send those back over. And so this protocol is with our general counsel right now. But I wanted to provide you with kind of an outline of what our process looks like, knowing that there's more detail within each area. So basically the incident is reported to a student staff supervisor. So in our department, a lot of times this is a resident director. It could also be an assistant director who works and supervises some student staff, office staff. So when the incident is reported to that staff member, that professional staff member, we want to make sure that it is documented in writing as we're going. So there's no like, hey, we waited to write this down until we gathered more information. It is, no, we write down in the moment when we get that information immediately what we were told. So we're not forgetting anything, that it's recorded accurately. Any notes or anything we try to save, which will go into our employee files, that is saved within our department. The supervisor of that professional supervisor notifies either the assistant director who supervises them or the associate director of that incident by phone. So with an HR situation regarding one of our student staff members, this is not something where we want to read about it the next day in our email. We want to know about it as soon as possible, and so that's either a call to our on-call folks or it's a call to their office during the day. That's allowing us the opportunity to really process what our next steps are and what seems appropriate. And so with that, we're able to talk a little bit about like, okay, based on the information that we know, is there a need for a conduct process? Is there a possibility of a student conduct violation? And then what do we already know? about the situation? Has the student staff member, are they the one that told you? So, in half of our situations, the student staff member is like, I went to this party last night and someone saw me and I was drinking. And so we may know already that they violated their agreement with us, their employment agreement with us. Or we may already know that it's a conduct violation, or we may not know and we may not have enough information. So being able to kind of process that through and figure out, do we need more information at this point, or are we able to go ahead and move forward with the HR process and with the conduct process? Within that conversation, we also want to talk about the staff member being placed on suspension, and whether or not that staff member needs to be relocated. In most of our situations, I would say 95% of our situations, we have gone through with suspension this last year, and asked the student staff member to take a break from the position as a way for us to not put a staff member into a situation that they may end up being liable based on the incident that we now have information about. So we ask them to step back just for their own protection. We also then talk about, is there community impact? So there's a difference for us between a staff member who is off campus with a group of friends and drinking, and a staff member who is in one of our residence halls drinking with residents. And so being able to say, what is the community impact? And removing them from the community may cause more negative impact than if we just let them stay in the community and suspend them from their duties while we review. So that's something for us to do, and we communicate that to the staff member within 24 hours of that initial report. And so if we can make it even by the end of the day, we try to do that, or the following morning. So that timeline is outlined within our protocol. We also then, with it being a policy violation, move forward with our conduct process. We have a conversation basically with the Dean of Students office as to if this should remain in-house or if it should stay with the Dean of Students. With the incident that we had in our case study earlier, in reflecting back on that, we felt like that actually may have been a situation that we wanted someone out of the department to hear in regards to conduct, that our department was maybe a little bit too connected to it. And so sometimes being able to have the Dean of Students office provide an objective viewpoint of a very complicated situation can be helpful to us. And then also it helps in terms of conflict of interest. So if our in-house conduct officer knows the student really well or has a relationship with them, we may be able to assign a different staff member to hear that conduct process. And then we're also able to look at staff availability. Are you able and available to finish this conduct process within the time frame of our conduct process, or are you going on vacation, or are you going on winter break, that sort of thing. So it's a conversation as we start that conduct process with our Dean of Students office, making sure we have appropriate staffing for it. And then basically we also have an HR process. So after gathering and documenting information, we meet with the student staff member to basically get their personal statement. So we take notes during that meeting, we ask questions, and we follow up on the information that they're providing to us as to what happened. We're going to document that within notes in that meeting, and those are kept on file. If there's a clear violation of the employee agreement, that helps us in determining whether or not we can just move forward with our HR process, or whether we need to wait until the outcome of a conduct meeting, or if we need to gather more information, because through that personal statement we got more witnesses to follow up with. And so being able to assess at that point, is there a clear outcome, or do we need more information, and what does that look like? An HR decision is always made in collaboration between the immediate supervisor and the AD that oversees that supervisor. So we don't ever want any of our decisions being made by necessarily one person, but in a collaborative effort, so that way that there's multiple people weighing in on that consideration. We also then utilize that information in that processing to create rationales and expectations that are documented in a formal letter. So whether the staff member is allowed to stay on staff or whether that staff member is removed from that conversation or from the review of that situation, we're basically documenting that in a formal way, and that information goes back into their student file. So I'm going to talk a little bit about implementation, then we'll talk about resources, and we'll be able to wrap up here. So with implementing it, I've said this before, but you want to make sure it's in writing, and then where are you going to house it? And so where does that information go once it's placed in writing? For us, it's part of being transparent with our student staff so that they understand when they go through this process what to expect. So we house this in our student staff manual as well as our RD pro staff manual. We also address this within our job agreements and job announcements, and not in like the full sense of like, here's what will happen if you violate this policy or any of our policies, but more in like a, hey, we refer to it within those, and then also we make sure to talk about all our student staff all being at-will employees and what that means within both the job description and job agreement, so that way it's out there, it's something that's known within our student staff. We also talk about it, so we start in April with our new student staff welcome. We do our contract reviews, and so we talk about kind of like the important information you should know, and we have them kind of highlight and run through kind of their job agreement, which is there are pieces of kind of those expectations within that, and we refer to our protocol so that they're able to know that one exists and where to find it. And then part of that is that we also, some of the implementation and a lot of the transition that we've made between the past 2 years. So in the fall of 2015, by the end of that year, I had removed 10 student staff from their positions. And so I really went into the next academic year with a new strategy of really addressing with our student staff, saying, hey, here's what the job is, and it's okay if this isn't really the job that's for you, but here's what we expect. And we set pretty high expectations, and so we talked a lot about role modeling and that standard with our student staff from that April meeting all the way through fall training, and then also doing follow-up conversations. But we also provided them with resources, and I think that's really important, is that if we're setting those high expectations, we're also providing them the resources to do that. And so part of knowing that with these high expectations and the generation that we're working with is telling them what resources are available as student staff employees. So, you know, when they're upset by their supervisor, who can they go to? Can they go to HR and get advice? Can they go to student legal services and ask them about a situation that happened and what they should do about it? And so being able to provide those resources. And the other thing that was really important to me and to our staff, our professional staff, is really building our connections with our student staff to see us as people and to focus on our relationships. And so that's been done through not just attending student staff meetings, but really engaging with them at programs. It's very typical for our assistant director team and myself to show up to events and programs on campus, to drop notes in the mailbox after one-on-ones when our staff have told us about amazing things our student staff are doing, and we really just focused a lot on those relationships. So then that way, when issues of accountability came up and a student was in a situation where they were meeting with us this last year, it wasn't a surprise. And with that, they knew, hey, I know who Christina is, and I know she's going to hear me out and let me tell my story, but I also know she might ask me some challenging questions, because that's what they can expect from me all the time, not just in accountability meetings, but when I show up at their programs, when I am at training with them, when I hold an activity or event for our student staff to come to, I show up in the same space, and so they kind of know what to expect from those conversations. And then making sure you utilize your protocol. I think a lot of times we create protocols and we stuff them in a binder or in a manual or online in our shared drive that eats everything, and then we forget about them. And so making sure to utilize your protocols, making sure people have copies, the people who need it, who utilize it, have copies available to them, and then referring back to it when you need to. And then the last thing I would say is just to utilize your resources. So we have definite partners at Boise State now because of the work that we put into this protocol. And so I know if a challenging situation comes up with a staff member, if another video comes about, right, I know that I can pick up a phone and call Kim and HR and say, hey, this situation is going on. I would love to talk through this with you before we move forward. Or picking up a phone and calling Annie in the general counsel's office and saying, hey, Annie, I, just got this report based on our protocol. Here's what I think our next steps are. And really getting her feedback on that and feeling comfortable knowing that when these complicated situations arise and we're applying it to our protocols, that there are resources available to all of us to seek out and ask questions and get feedback on. So lastly, I would just say resources that are available for you as you write these protocols, whether it's around student staff conduct, or another protocol within your department that you might need. Really think about the staff members who are directly impacted by your protocol and reaching out to them and getting feedback, doing focus groups, reaching out to campus partners across campus to hear how they handle those situations, but then also what campus partners are really vital to the work of that protocol. And building relationships with them, getting to know them, whether it's just grabbing coffee and hearing about their weekends so that you get to know them a little bit, but then also utilizing them as a resource for these processes. Also, additionally, every state has different HR practices and laws and policies, and so going to your Department of Human Resources website could provide you with some great information. They have trainings on there, they have resources posted, so that could give you some helpful resources as well. Talking to your peer institutions, of course, and then lastly, job descriptions and agreements. I used to hate our job descriptions, and every time I would be like, oh, I have to review these, it's painful. But I think that for us now, I really feel like our job descriptions, our job agreements are my friends. They are the things that keep us in terms of our standards, our expectations. They're the things that are going to protect us when a student gets upset and hires a lawyer. And so I've gotten to know them well. I make sure my staff knows them well, and we review them annually. And I think that's really important. So that way they never get as outdated as ours were in the fall of 2015 when we had so much staff transition. But you know that your protocols, your information, your job descriptions, your expectations are ready to go every year, and that they are solid and they're in line with your philosophy and how you want to work with your staff. So with that, I am all done presenting. Are there any questions or things I could answer for anyone?
This would be a great time for anyone to use the chat feature if you do have any questions for Christina. And just to close today, thank you, Christina, for taking the time to share your knowledge in this area. The association appreciates what you do for our members. If everyone can just be on the lookout for future webinars by checking the AIMHO 365 page on the AIMHO website. That'll also supply you with the link to our YouTube page where you'll be able to find this webinar and so many others. Please take a few moments to comment on the online survey that will appear on your screen here shortly. Again, a big thank you to Christina for this presentation today. Do we have any questions in that chat feature? It doesn't look like we do yet. So.
And then if you want a copy of our protocol because you're interested in what it looks like, the formal one, when I get it back from legal counsel, you can send me an email. I hope to have it back by the end of the month. So you can send me an email, and I'd be happy to share that with you once we have it back from them. So please feel free to reach out. I am happy to talk with you.
Thank you, Christina. This was such a great presentation.
Good. I'm glad it was helpful, and you all have a great summer, and we'll be seeing you soon.
You as well. Goodbye.
Bye.